I was sitting at my kitchen table, sorting through scheduling notes for a wedding I had practically built from the ground up, when my phone lit up with a message from my mother. It wasn't a call, not even a voice note, just a cold little bubble on my screen that read, "Please don't come. The family wants a drama-free wedding." For a second, I thought I misread it. I blinked, reopened the message, and before the sting even settled, another notification slid across the top. My sister Serena had papped the little heart reaction on the text. A like. She liked the fact that I wasn't welcome. I don't know what hurt more, my mother's message or the casual way Serena endorsed it, as if wiping me out of the picture made everything cleaner, prettier, easier for them. For a moment, everything inside me went perfectly still. Not broken, not shattered, just still, the way the air freezes right before a storm. I typed back 2 words. Great choice. No fight, no argument, no begging to understand why the daughter who paid for half their lives was suddenly an inconvenience. Just silence. And in that silence, something inside me shifted. Not dramatically, but definitively. Like a quiet click of a lock turning in the opposite direction. They didn't know it yet, but that was the moment every payment ended. The deposits, the catering schedules, the lighting team, the venue coordination, everything they had been leaning on me for stopped belonging to them the minute they decided I didn't belong at their celebration. I looked at my phone again, the screen still glowing with Serena's reaction. I wasn't crying. I wasn't even shaking. I was just awake, in a way I hadn't been in years. They thought pushing me out would make the wedding easier. They thought I would disappear quietly, like I always did. But they had no idea something much bigger had switched on inside me. They thought I would break, but they had no idea how completely I was about to break their entire plan instead. If you've stayed with me all the way to this moment, then please like this video and leave a sweet little comment. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, make sure you do it now. We share amazing stories like this every single day. I was halfway through reviewing a list of vendor confirmations when my phone buzzed with a notification that didn't sound urgent, yet somehow carried a weight I felt before I even picked it up. I glanced at the screen expecting a simple update, maybe a reminder from the caterer or a question from the decorator. Instead, I saw my mother's name, and beneath it a single sentence that shifted the ground under my feet. "Please don't come. The family wants a drama-free wedding." For a moment, I just stared, certain it had to be some kind of joke, something typed in error, something she would follow up with a clarification, but nothing else came. The words sat there, cold and deliberate, like they had been waiting to be sent. Before I could even react, a second notification appeared. Serena had reacted to the message with a heart. The timing was so instant, it felt rehearsed. I watched the tiny icon appear beneath the text, that little digital gesture that said everything they never bothered to say out loud. It was such a soft sound, that tap of approval, but it might as well have been a door slamming shut in my face. I could feel the sting building in my chest, but it wasn't the dramatic, falling apart kind of pain. It was quieter, heavier, settling inside me like a stone. For so long, I had been the one who stepped in, who handled things, who cleaned up the messes no one else wanted to deal with. And now, suddenly, I was the problem they wanted to remove for their convenience. I read the message again, not because I doubted what it said, but because part of me needed to understand the way betrayal looks when it's typed out so casually. I felt my fingers move before my thoughts caught up, typing out the only reply that made sense. Great choice. There was a strange steadiness in me as I pressed send, a calmness that didn't match the moment, but felt like the beginning of something I couldn't fully name yet. I wasn't pleading, arguing, or trying to correct whatever story they had built in their minds. I wasn't asking for a seat at a table I had funded but apparently didn't deserve. I just let the silence settle, and in that silence, something shifted sharply inside me. Standing there with my phone in my hand, I realized that if I wasn't welcome at the wedding, then my money, my time, and my unending willingness to fix everything didn't need to be there either. I didn't owe them my presence, and I certainly didn't owe them my resources. That thought wasn't bitter. It was clarifying. It felt like drawing a thin line in the sand and finally standing on the right side of it. They wanted a drama-free wedding without me? Fine. But they had no idea how much of that wedding depended on the very person they had just erased. And for the first time, instead of trying to mend the hurt, I simply let the truth sit inside me. This time, I wasn't paying for anything. Growing up, I learned early that every family assigns roles, and mine had decided who I was long before I ever had a chance to define myself. Serena was the light, the center of attention, the one who could do no wrong. My mother treated her like something fragile and precious, always stepping in to soften her mistakes, always praising her even when she put in the bare minimum. And then there was me, the daughter who didn't require tending. I was the dependable one, the one expected to adjust, absorb, fix, and handle whatever slipped through everyone else's fingers. I don't remember a single family gathering where I wasn't helping in the kitchen, balancing schedules, or quietly paying for something no one realized needed paying until the bill showed up. What started as small responsibilities when I was a teenager turned into a lifelong assignment by the time I reached adulthood. When Serena needed help buying books for college, I covered it. When my father's car insurance lapsed, I fixed it. When my mother wanted to host a holiday dinner that everyone could enjoy without stress, I took on the stress she pretended didn't exist. It wasn't that I minded being capable. Competence came naturally to me. I liked efficiency, organization, knowing that things were handled. But somewhere along the way, my family stopped seeing my efforts as help and started treating them as obligations. It was almost as if convenience had replaced gratitude. The few times I hesitated or suggested someone else could handle something, my mother would sigh in that familiar way that implied I was being difficult. Serena would complain about being overwhelmed, even when she had barely done anything. My father would simply stay quiet and hope the problem resolved itself, which meant, inevitably, that it landed on me. The only person who questioned this imbalance was my grandmother. She watched quietly from the edges, observing things no one else bothered to notice. She saw the way I was volunteered without being asked, the way I stepped in without acknowledgement, the way my shoulders tightened just a little more every year. She was the one who would touch my hand and say, "You don't always have to be the one who carries everything." But back then, I didn't understand what she meant. I believed being strong meant being useful, being reliable, being the person everyone could depend on. I mistook self-sacrifice for love and responsibility for belonging. Looking back now, I realize how deeply that belief shaped the way I handled Serena's wedding. I said yes to every request because that was the role I had been trained to fill. I funded everything because I thought that was what family did. And I ignored every small red flag because accepting them would mean admitting something I wasn't ready to face, that the love I was giving was not the love I was receiving. And that kind of truth changes you long before you're willing to say it out loud. Planning Serena's wedding felt less like helping a sister and more like managing a full-scale corporate project that no one else bothered to take seriously. From the very beginning, every major task somehow slid into my hands, usually wrapped in a casual comment from my mother like, "Valentina, you're better at these things," or Serena's habitual, "Can you just handle it? You always do." The truth was, they didn't ask, they assigned. And I stepped into every assignment because that's what I'd been trained to do. The venue was the first big decision. And of course, I was the one who researched locations, toured options, negotiated prices, and placed the deposit. My mother praised the final choice loudly to everyone who would listen, but not once did she mention who secured it or paid for it. Then came the catering. Serena wanted a modern but timeless menu, which meant hours of back and forth with vendors, tasting appointments she skipped, and invoices she didn't even glance at. I covered those too, because apparently this wedding had become a silent partnership between me and my credit card. Every vendor I dealt with quickly learned the same pattern. Serena had opinions, my mother had expectations, and I had the actual responsibility. Lighting adjustments, my job. Decor concerns, my inbox. Rental issues, my bill. Even small things like replacing a missing sash on Serena's bridal robe or correcting a typo on the rehearsal dinner cards landed squarely on me. None of these tasks were overwhelming on their own, but collectively they painted a very clear picture of my role in this family. Dependable enough to manage everything, invisible enough to receive no credit for any of it. What made it worse was Serena's attitude. She floated through the process like a guest at her own event, dismissing my suggestions with barely a glance and rolling her eyes whenever I brought up the budget or schedule. My mother wasn't any better. If Serena asked for something unreasonable, Mom would simply turn to me with that familiar, expectant look, the one that said, "Fix it, make it work." Not once did she ask how much I was spending, or whether I could afford to keep covering the rising costs. It didn't even occur to her that I was carrying the entire financial weight of this wedding on my back. But the part that stung the most was the growing realization that none of this effort came from love they felt for me, only from the convenience I offered them. They admired Serena's beauty and celebrated her joy, but they relied on my labor as if it were some endless resource they were entitled to. And despite everything I was doing, they still found ways to make me feel like an outsider in an event I was practically building by hand. Looking back, the signs of what was coming were there long before the text message. I just didn't want to see them. My grandmother had always possessed a quiet intuition, the kind of wisdom that didn't arrive loudly but settled into the spaces where truth usually hides. A few days after a particularly tense planning meeting, I drove her to a dress fitting for the wedding. It was supposed to be a lighthearted moment, something sweet in the middle of all the tension, but even in that small boutique, there was a heaviness I couldn't quite name yet. She stood in front of the mirror, smoothing the soft fabric over her arms with careful fingers, her reflection gentle but thoughtful. I watched her, hoping the calmness of the room would settle the uneasy feeling I had been carrying for weeks. But when the fitting assistant stepped out to grab pins, my grandmother turned to me with an expression that made my stomach tighten. "I heard your mother talking," she said softly, as if saying it too loudly would make the truth feel sharper. For a moment, I just stared at her, unsure whether I heard her correctly. She didn't embellish or dramatize. She spoke in the same tone she used when trimming roses in her garden, careful and deliberate. I tried to laugh it off, suggesting maybe Mom was just overwhelmed or maybe Serena misunderstood something. But my grandmother shook her head slowly, her eyes holding mine the way she did when I was a child and she needed me to pay attention. "Mija, they're making decisions that don't include you, and they aren't hiding it the way people hide accidents, they're hiding it the way people hide intentions." Her words settled deep, stirring a kind of discomfort that wasn't new, but had been easy to ignore until now. A part of me wanted to dismiss it entirely. I didn't want to believe my own mother and sister could be planning around me while I was doing everything to make their lives easier. I didn't want to accept that the tension I felt wasn't in my imagination. It was in their choices. Still, I defended them, the way I always did. I told her I was overthinking, that stress was making me sensitive, that sometimes families just communicate badly when planning big events. But she didn't buy it, and she didn't back down. She touched my wrist gently, grounding me. "You give too much credit to people who don't give you enough care," she whispered, "and one day that imbalance will break your heart if you don't see it coming." I wanted to argue, but deep down, her words hit a place I had been avoiding. The missed updates, the separate conversations, the whispers when I entered a room, the way Serena barely acknowledged my involvement unless it benefited her. The signs were all there, scattered through the weeks like small warnings I had swept aside, because admitting them meant admitting the truth. The people I was carrying weren't carrying me back. I left the boutique with my grandmother's warning echoing in my chest. At the time, I still didn't know just how right she was, but I was about to find out. 2 days after my grandmother's warning, I stopped by my mother's house to drop off the finalized rehearsal dinner timeline. It was a simple visit, the kind I had made dozens of times during the wedding planning, but the air felt different the moment I stepped inside. Serena was on the couch with her phone in her hand, scrolling casually through the family group chat. My mother hovered nearby, flipping through seating charts and mumbling about floral arrangements as if I weren't even in the room. I stood there for several seconds before either of them acknowledged me. Finally, Serena glanced up, her expression flat. "Didn't know you were coming," she said, as if my presence needed justification. Before I could respond, her phone chimed softly. She looked back down, tapped the screen, and that's when I saw it. The same message. Please don't come. The family wants a drama-free wedding. My mother had forwarded it again to confirm the guest list adjustments. And right there, in real time, Serena tapped the heart. Again. This time, she didn't hesitate or try to hide it. She didn't even look up to see whether I noticed. She just pressed like, locked her phone, and sighed at my mother as if they were discussing something mildly annoying. The first time she reacted to that message, it had shocked me. This time, it didn't. The shock was gone, the disbelief gone, even the sting felt muted. In its place was a cold, still clarity that spread through my chest like someone flipping off an old switch. I realized with a certainty so sharp it felt like it cut through the last thread connecting me to them that this wasn't a misunderstanding or a moment of frustration. This was deliberate. It wasn't about drama, it wasn't about space, it wasn't about some conflict they wanted to avoid. It was about them choosing a version of family that did not include me, not even in the celebration I was paying for. And the most painful part wasn't the action itself. It was how easy it was for them, how casual, how unbothered, how normal it seemed to them to erase me while still benefiting from everything I had poured into their lives. I watched Serena tuck her hair behind her ear, watched my mother circle names on a seating layout that I alone had organized, and something inside me quietly stopped. Not love, not loyalty, just the part of me that kept hoping they would eventually see me, appreciate me, treat me as someone who mattered. That part died in that room, right between a forwarded text message and a heart reaction. I didn't argue, I didn't confront. I simply felt the final crack settle into place, and with it came a calm I had never known before. They had made their choice, and now, finally, I understood it. I walked out of the house not as the daughter they depended on, but as the woman who would no longer carry what they so easily discarded. That night, my apartment felt unusually quiet, the kind of silence that doesn't cling to you, but clears space for something sharper to take shape. I sat at my desk with my laptop open, the wedding spreadsheets glowing on the screen. For months, those documents had represented responsibility, order, and the fragile hope that all my effort would someday be appreciated. Now, they felt like chains I had wrapped around myself without noticing. I scrolled through the contract slowly, not with anger or panic, but with a calmness so steady it almost frightened me. Every vendor agreement, venue, catering, lighting, photography, decor rentals was tied directly to my name, my account, my authorization. They had built an entire wedding on the assumption that I would never say no, never step back, never choose myself. They hadn't just taken me for granted, they had built their confidence on the belief that I wouldn't push back. And that belief was about to collapse. I opened the first contract and drafted a simple, professional message. We will not be moving forward with this arrangement. Please cancel the pending invoice and confirm that no further charges will be processed. No explanation, no apology, no emotional context. Just business. I copied that message into every email thread, adjusting the details as needed. Venue, canceled. Catering, canceled. Lighting team, canceled. Floral installments, canceled. Photographer, canceled. Rentals, canceled. One by one, the structure of their perfect wedding unraveled at the same quiet pace they had used to erase me. When I hit send on the final email, I exhaled deeply, as though a weight I'd been carrying for years had finally loosened its grip. It wasn't revenge in the dramatic sense. It wasn't about hurting them the way they had hurt me. It was about alignment, my actions finally matching the truth I had been swallowing for far too long. Half an hour later, my phone buzzed. It wasn't my family. It was the first vendor. Hi, Valentina. We received your cancellation. Could you clarify who we should contact moving forward? I typed back, please redirect all inquiries to Serena and Marissa. And just like that, the calls and messages began redirecting. Somewhere across town, they were realizing that the foundation they stood on, the one they assumed was theirs, had never belonged to them in the first place. I wasn't doing this to create chaos. I was doing it to reclaim the part of me I had given away too freely. After sending the final message, I gathered every contract, screenshot, and financial record into a folder labeled Wedding Documentation. Then I reached out to Mason, a lawyer I had consulted once for unrelated matters. "I need some guidance," I wrote. He replied almost immediately, "I can help. Come by tomorrow." I closed my laptop, feeling more solid than I had in years. I hadn't yelled, I hadn't cried, I hadn't even broken down. I had simply stopped enabling them. And in that quiet, deliberate decision, I discovered a kind of power I didn't know I possessed. By the time the next morning arrived, everything felt strangely steady, as if the chaos I expected would erupt inside me had instead settled into a quiet, firm resolve. I met my grandmother outside the attorney's office, her small hand slipping into mine with a kind of reassurance I didn't know I needed until she gave it. Mason briefed us calmly, laying out the documents we'd be presenting and explaining what our options were. He wasn't dramatic or intimidating. He was simply precise, which was exactly what the situation required. When we left his office, we drove straight to the airport, arriving just as their flight was scheduled to land. I could feel my grandmother's nerves in the way she kept smoothing the fabric of her coat, but her grip on my arm stayed firm. For the first time, it wasn't me holding her up, it was her steady presence grounding me. We stood near the arrivals exit, the sliding doors opening and closing as travelers moved past with tired steps and luggage dragging behind them. Then I saw them, my mother leading the way, with that familiar sharp expression, Serena trailing behind with her suitcase, and Damon somewhere in the back, already scrolling through his phone. For a brief second, instinct tugged at me. The old version of myself wanted to soften, to greet them, to ask if the trip went well, to smooth the edges like I always did. But that version of me was already gone. My mother's eyes met mine first, confusion flashing across her face before irritation settled in. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, adjusting her coat like my presence was an inconvenience she hadn't prepared for. Serena rolled her eyes dramatically. "If you're here to fix something, don't. We already have a ride." I didn't move. I didn't blink. "I'm not here to pick you up," I said. Mason stepped forward, his voice calm and professional. "Good morning. My name is Mason Hill. I represent Valentina and her grandmother." My mother stiffened, color draining from her cheeks. "A lawyer? For what?" Mason handed her a folder. "This concerns the financial exploitation of funds related to the wedding, including the unauthorized attempt to access your mother's emergency savings." Serena blinked rapidly, taking a step forward. "This has to be a misunderstanding." "No," my grandmother said softly, her voice trembling but strong. For the first time, everyone went still. My mother fumbled through the documents, her eyes widening as she recognized her own messages, her own decisions reflected back at her in black and white. People around us slowed their pace, the weight of the scene drawing brief stares and murmurs. My mother hated public attention when she wasn't controlling it. "Valentina, how dare you make a scene like this?" she snapped. "You pushed me out," I said quietly, "and then you tried to use Grandma's savings when you ran out of mine." Serena's voice cracked. "You ruined everything. All you had to do was stay out of the way." My grandmother stepped closer to me, lifting her chin. "No, they told her not to come. They erased her from the wedding she paid for." The words hung heavy in the air. Mason closed the folder. "You'll need to respond to the notices within the stated time frame. Until then, you no longer have access to the grandmother's accounts." My mother looked between all of us, her confidence dissolving. "Valentina, what are we supposed to do now?" I met her eyes with a clarity I had earned through pain. "Figure it out," I said, "the same way you expected me to." And then, with my grandmother at my side, I walked away. Not in anger, in freedom. Walking away from them in the airport should have felt chaotic, but instead it felt strangely clean, like a door finally closing on a room I had been suffocating in for years. My grandmother held my arm as we moved through the airport. Crowds, her steps steady and sure, as if she had been waiting her whole life for me to free myself from the weight I never should have carried. When we reached the parking lot, she turned to me with eyes that shimmered, not from sadness, but from relief. "You did what needed to be done," she whispered. I believed her. For once, I didn't question it. I didn't question myself. That evening, back in my apartment, I sat with the silence that used to feel heavy, but now felt liberating. It wasn't the silence of being excluded or ignored. It was the silence of finally making a choice that wasn't rooted in guilt or obligation. I opened my journal, something I hadn't touched in months, and wrote down the words that had been echoing inside me since the airport. "I'm done being the safety net." Seeing them on paper made everything feel more real. I didn't owe them the version of myself they were most comfortable using. I didn't owe them endless patience, endless resources, endless forgiveness. In fact, the only thing I owed myself was the chance to breathe without constantly monitoring everyone else's needs. Over the next few days, there were messages, missed calls from my mother, short texts from Serena, each one tinged with frustration or panic. None of them sounded like people who wanted to repair a relationship. They sounded like people realizing their plans had fallen apart the moment their source of stability walked away. I didn't respond, not because I wanted to hurt them, but because answering would have meant stepping back into a role I had finally stepped out of. The truth was, I had been emotionally detaching for longer than I realized. The betrayal wasn't sudden. It had been built slowly, piece by piece, through years of being overlooked and overused. The text message had only given shape to something that had already been forming inside me. My grandmother visited often during those days. We sat together at her small kitchen table while she made tea, the kind she brewed when she wanted me to slow down and feel instead of think. One afternoon, she reached across the table and took my hand. "Letting go doesn't mean you failed them," she said gently. "It means you finally chose yourself." Her words broke something open inside me. Not pain, but relief. I realized how deeply I had been clinging to the hope that if I worked hard enough, loved hard enough, sacrificed enough, my family would one day choose me back. But love that can only be earned isn't love. It's labor. And I was done laboring for people who couldn't even see the weight I carried. That night, I felt the shift happen fully. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't grieving the loss of something I never truly had. I was stepping into a new part of myself, one built on boundaries, clarity, and the quiet certainty that freedom sometimes comes from finally walking away. In the weeks that followed, everything began to settle in a way I hadn't expected. Not dramatically, not with chaos or confrontation, but with a quiet finality that felt almost gentle. The wedding unraveled quickly after the confrontation at the airport. Vendors confirmed their cancellations, invoices disappeared from my inbox, and the plans that had once consumed every corner of my life dissolved without me lifting another finger. I heard bits and pieces through relatives, how my mother scrambled to find last-minute replacements, how Serena panicked when she realized how much of the event had been built on my payments. But none of it involved me anymore, and that was the part that felt new. For the first time, I wasn't being pulled back into the storm. I wasn't being asked to fix what they broke. I wasn't being guilted into carrying what wasn't mine. My grandmother's finances were legally protected now, a safeguard that brought her a sense of security she hadn't felt in years. She kept the envelope where she always had, tucked away in the drawer near her garden tools. But now she touched it differently, without fear, without worry, as if it finally belonged to her again. I visited her often, not out of duty, but because being with her felt like stepping into a part of myself that still felt whole. We'd sit in the garden together, sunlight filtering through the rose bushes she pruned so lovingly. One afternoon, as she trimmed a branch with soft, careful cuts, she said, "You look lighter, like you finally put something down." She was right. I had spent years carrying expectations, responsibilities, and hopes that were never reciprocated. Letting them go felt like learning to breathe all over again. With that space clear, I started thinking about the kind of life I wanted, one not defined by obligation, but intention. I applied for a volunteer position at a local elder advocacy center, the same place I had once researched quietly, thinking of my grandmother. When I stepped into that building for the first time, something in me aligned. These were people who needed support, yes, but they valued presence more than perfection. They appreciated effort. They recognized kindness. They didn't take it for granted. That simple difference changed everything. My days began to take on a different rhythm. I'd spend mornings helping coordinate services for seniors, afternoons calling families to ensure support was in place, evenings sharing tea with my grandmother while she told stories of her childhood. Slowly, I felt myself returning to a version of me I had forgotten, the one who loved helping because it came from the heart, not obligation. I kept a small box in my apartment where I placed every reminder of the role I used to play. Old receipts for emergencies I covered, lists of tasks I completed for others, even a few trinkets tied to memories that once felt painful. One evening, I went through the box and realized none of it held power anymore. So I let it go, every piece of it. Walking forward didn't mean erasing the past. It meant refusing to let it define me. My story didn't end with being pushed out of a wedding. It began with choosing myself for the first time. And that choice changed everything. If this story resonated with you in any way, I'd love to hear what part spoke to you the most. Share your thoughts in the comments and let me know where you're listening from. And before you go, don't forget to subscribe. We bring you new, heartfelt stories every day that remind us how strength, healing, and courage look in real life.